Hey, everyone. You are listening and watching simultaneously Rashkin Report Perspectives and Silicon Curtain. Congratulations. My name is Yuri Rashkin and joined, of course, by Jonathan Fink. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm fine. I've thawed out now.
That's awesome because I just wanted to, let our audience know these were not technical difficulties. We were just having a good time chatting. And then thought, you know what? We should really start this.
We
So
should bring people in on it
we
because,
should really be playing it. So awesome. So about thawing, it's not about that, Khrushchev thawing of after Stalin. It's like literal thawing after. Where did you go?
I don't know. Shall I be cagey about this? No, but I went to the center of the action, as it were. It was super cold in Kiev.
Wow.
We hit minus 20 a couple of times, so that was fun, especially on one
What?
particular thing.
I'm
I
sorry.
went.
Let me. What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? Even Ukrainians say, like, "Oh, this isn't a good time. This is not a good time to." One in particular, and this is something, while Ukrainians are struggling to stay warm, we actually went out. I won't give any details. We went out to a polygon north of the city in the middle of the night to observe drone interception using some rather secret technology that we weren't allowed to film. That was kind of fascinating, but it was minus 20, and we were out in a blizzard for 5 hours watching this. So that was different, and people will see this. Minus 20, not so much fun. People will see this in upcoming video. Once I get it through, what do you call it, OPSEC, operational security, has gone through the footage to check I haven't revealed anything, then people will get to see a little bit of that, get a little sort of taster of that. Before we get anywhere with all of this, one thing that stunned and shocked me, and this was the number of people that I met who are involved in drone tech, are involved in various things. It could be countering disinformation, it could be drone tech, it could be whatever. And they've had interaction with Western journalists who have variously published material without notification and pre-agreed, validation stages, have published pictures of secret material which they were asked not to film, have published details that showed the locations in their photographs when they were specifically asked to take sort of zoom in photographs or take images that didn't show some aspect of, say, a building or a street or part of the horizon that would reveal location. Everybody I met had a story about, oh yeah, well, a journalist came and, we've had to change our location because, and blah, blah, and blah. Shocking, stunning. Whether this is just extraordinary sloppiness or whether some foreign correspondents bring an element of hubris with them, which means they don't take this stuff seriously, or whether it's just complete ignorance of how to cover, a wartime environment. That's one thing I brought away that stunned and shocked and saddened me, actually.
If I can add my 2 cents to that, because I feel like I kind of stumbled onto something, and now I see this through kind of a new lens a lot, and that is like a kind of a sense that you gotta have personal responsibility. And if you don't have personal responsibility, if you can't say, you know what, I can do this, but it would be irresponsible to do that, and
Yes.
then you don't do it even though you can, it's a really kind of a not for everyone kind of a concept.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you can look at it in a variety of different settings, just lack of responsibility. But eventually it leads you to what's happening in Ukraine, because Russia didn't have to do this, but they
No.
thought they could, and so why not? And so this kind of lack of responsibility, lack of internal restraint, in Russia, sometimes it's referred to imperialist, imperial, but that's that mindset of like, if I can, then I want. That if you can't
Well, if
stop
no one's
me,
going to stop me, that's
right?
the root of it. Do I have a green light, Mr. Biden? Do I have a green light, or are you going to put up some resistance? What should we expect?
Oh, you should see the videos that Jake Sullivan is recording now. He is in
I
support of
tried.
Ukraine. You would be surprised.
I tried and I couldn't watch it because the lack of self-awareness is so great and so jarring, I'm afraid.
Well put.
Yeah, hubris all round. Now,
Right.
talking of
So we have
hubris,
there. So you're
yeah,
going to go through everything being checked and double checked, and you're going to be responsible about this. And then you're going to have some incredible footage for us about something to do with drones in super cold freaking weather.
correct. That's right.
Yes.
With an interesting surprise guest who I won't reveal, who just sort of turned up in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, and people are
How
going to be
long?
like,
How
"What?"
many? How many? Wow. Zelensky. I'm just kidding.
It
Who knows?
wasn't, but that would be fun. But no, it wasn't.
How long did you spend this time around in Ukraine itself?
6 nights,
Wow.
7 days.
So you're working on a bigger project now that you're kind of
Well,
this
a
is
bigger project, yeah. I mean, I can sort of give a little bit of a hint at that one, and it's what's happening in the drone war is historic. It is of huge significance, I think, to the history of warfare, and how the 21st century is going to play out. Some even the military say yes, it's a transitionary phase, and there's going to be more technological development. That's inevitable because the adaptation cycle, the iteration cycle, as they call it, is now at an extraordinary level. Drones that were built, say, 3 weeks ago, um, are maybe no longer effective on the front. They need to be fine-tuned. They need frequencies changed. They need different bits of kit on there, software patches. They need to deal with different EW or fine-tuning. So the iteration cycle is incredible, and that just affects everything in the ecosystem. This is really not understood, I think, in most parts of the West. And the thing that we are trying to tackle is this. Again, it comes down to hubris and ignorance. There is a widely held belief amongst many, even in sort of military and procurement circles, and especially those who, let's say in Whitehall and other places, the corridors of power, they say, well, of course, Ukrainians are very good at this drone stuff, but it's not going to be relevant to us. That's not how we're going to fight the next war, etc. So this incredible ostrich mentality, head in the sand, which Ukrainians think is just stunning, especially those who are
You know
involved
what?
in drone
With
tech.
all due respect, we have to,
Yeah.
I think, acknowledge that had Putin not attacked, Ukrainians would have continued to keep their head in the sand.
Of
This,
course, many, many Ukrainians didn't want to believe this was coming and didn't indeed believe it was coming, even when it happened. But this, once you're in it, it's a catalyst for extraordinary changes. We also have to acknowledge that the furious innovation in drones is essentially was absolutely necessary to make up for the lack of manpower in infantry. So again, it's this adaptation being forced upon you, but once it is, on the Ukrainian side at least, it matches with something in the culture, the problem solving culture, the rapid iteration, the intolerance to things not working, the very close connections between the military and between tech entrepreneurs. I mean, those who worked in Silicon Valley will know what it feels like to have, just sort of 1 or 2 degrees of separation from between everybody, but apply that not just to sort of civilian tech, but to an entire ecosystem that encompasses the military tech and those who are on the innovation front. So it's a kind of unique environment. But if we're going to master this warfare, or even just stay apace with it, it's not just about sort of building some production lines. It's about sort of absorbing this entire kind of ecosystem. So there's this really jarring thing where you can see that happening in Ukraine. You can see the extraordinary culture that is necessary to deliver it, simply to maintain the status quo on the front line. If you fall behind in this race, technological race, you'll be rolled over, quite physically rolled over by the opposing side. That I don't think is at all understood. Many in the West just see, well, the front is static, etc. But you've got two sides which are sort of running on the spot, and people say, hang on a second, two sides. surely Russia's not good at this stuff. Surely Russia is all about meat waves. Well, yeah, a lot of its troops are. But again, you speak to Ukrainians in the sector, they have a healthy respect, actually, for certain portions of the Russian military that have massively grown its drone forces, that are training teenagers up, that are able to take technologies that work and scale. Now, they got spies that are
they
stealing some
are
of this
holding,
stuff, but
and
yeah,
Russians are holding all sorts of competitions and classes,
yes,
training
they
their
are.
future drone operators.
Yeah. And their army of drone operators, now these are only a couple of elite units, which form a minority of their overall forces. But if you were to compare the sheer size of their elite drone units combined with a few special forces units, well, I'm sorry, but they're larger than the armies in many European countries, including the British Army. So we underestimate Russia's capability at our peril. We underestimate the scale of what Ukrainians are achieving and the scale of the front line, absolutely our peril. Because whereas Ukrainians are holding the line, they're doing it through extraordinary sacrifice, incredible innovation, this furious kind of running on the spot, massive, let's say, activation of civic society. Well, I'm sorry, I don't believe many European countries have even started to develop all these components that are required to resist such an adversary.
But it seems to me that the right approach, considering those facts, would be for Europe just to invest in Ukraine.
Not just invest in Ukraine. This is a someone who we don't always agree with here, but Joseph Lindley said, look, you know, stop listening to some of Trump's stuff, right? Don't just endlessly argue and point the finger and say Trump is this, Trump is that. He came up with a nice idea. He said, stop fearing Russia. Why doesn't Europe send its troops to train in Ukraine? Not just training Ukrainian troops in NATO standard stuff, not just supplying Ukraine, not just building, co-ventures. Europe en masse should send its troops to observe and train in Ukraine and stick two fingers up at Russia and say, yeah, screw you, we're going to do this. So it's interesting because it's not directly kinetically confronting Russia, but it is showing that Europe is not willing to be coerced, or really, as I currently think, be in this state of abject fear of Russia. It would also give a very strong signal to Trump's America that we are very, very serious about becoming a player in this modern world of world disorder.
Well, it's a tall order to be a player in that world order, because Europe was not playing that game for a very long time, and now it has to catch up. But again, I feel like it has the finances and resources and brains to move itself to where it needs to be, with the understanding that it doesn't have an army. I was thinking with this kind of a different topic, but we have this kind of a thing with Canada, and we think that they should be our 51st state. Not we, but our president does. So my apologies on behalf of all people. But I was thinking, if United States, God forbid, attacks Canada, would Great Britain be required, expected to help out? It's the Dominion or whatever. And
technically, that we have multiple commitments, levels of commitment there, including a NATO commitment, including a constitutional, I guess, commitment, because people forget the king, I was about to say the queen, the king is technically the head of state in Canada. So you're attacking a Commonwealth country. You're attacking Britain if that were to happen.
We would probably be looking at it as some reunification with peoples of they're all really Americans. Quit saying you're Canadians. What is this? There's no such thing as a Canadian.
It's the oppressed American-speaking peoples of Canada. Yeah.
Oh my. Yes, I think that's where we're headed. I mean, if we don't stop, but that's the path that we're on. And And then, so what conclusion do you arrive, having come from afar and return
Well, the
back?
other one is Greenland. I mean, Greenland is far more, let's say, certainly in the minds of Ukraine and Europeans, some kind of challenge in Greenland is certainly feels to be a much more realistic threat rather than a performative threat. And even though the polls showed that actually a vast majority of Americans do not favor a physical takeover of Greenland, that doesn't mean that there can't be some confrontation. I mean, it's not really for this episode, but my fear is that the worst case scenario, if Trump is actually serious and not just trying to generate headlines to keep him, butt out of jail and to defer the Epstein files, if he is actually serious about a new American imperialism, then we could see, in the very worst case, a pincer movement, a kind of repetition of World War II, a sort of Ribbentrop Pact where we don't know what the real clauses are. But if America was to manufacture a crisis where Europe and the US were confronting each other in Greenland, and then Russia was attacked from the east, well, is that same US going to save Europe? Or is it going to deflect our forces, distract them, and pull them into a confrontation in the western part, the northern part of Europe, while
Or can we
Russia attacks from the east?
or can we pull a Crimea and grab Greenland?
I don't think Russia would make a move on Europe unless it was absolutely sure that the US was not going to come and defend. So, to my mind, the Greenland scenario is the precursor to a Russian invasion of Europe, or possibly a hybridized invasion. It could be a full-scale hybrid
I
attack.
just think that I keep seeing how Trump plays by Putin's rules. And I think, what does Putin do? He sees when the country next door is going through a revolution and like your neighbor's house is on fire, you run in there, grab something valuable and run out. Like, you won't be needing this anyway. Your house is on
Yes,
fire. And then,
that's right.
So if the world was on fire, that would be probably an opportunity that Trump would take to grab Greenland.
I
But
think
right now, I think
both of them, yeah.
Well, it's important to understand that what is keeping Greenland still with Denmark versus anything else, it's not the military might, because militarily we got this. And I think that's the thing that Trump had to get over, is that militarily this is not even a question. But it's not about military.
Yeah. The ends he's trying to achieve could be better achieved by working with allies, but that doesn't generate any headlines for him. That's not red meat for his base. That's not going to keep Epstein out of the headlines. And of course, we see that timeline accelerating. I mean, the big question, of course, is why he hasn't moved against Iran. One could say that it's because Putin has asked him not to. That's very likely. One could also say that he's just holding those forces, that sword hovering over Iran, not to the benefit of the protesters, but just so that he can move when he needs to, when the domestic political cycle means that he needs a massive distraction. And overriding all of this is Taiwan, which I thought may actually be on the cards for this year, but there's been a weird little kind of coup type thing rumored in Beijing with senior military people removed. I wonder whether they were pushing back against an immediate invasion, favoring one maybe later, and that's why Xi removed them. It's a theory. I want to play that out with some China experts. But I think both Putin and Trump would wait for Taiwan to kick off. Taiwan distracts the US in the Pacific. It could be that with the world aflame, Putin decides he could move on Europe with a sort of hybridized assault. It could also be that actually, despite telling us they can only fight on two fronts, that Trump decides that we're gonna do this over here in Taiwan, or maybe we're not going to save them, but we'll attack Greenland instead. And then, with all of this kicking off, Putin decides that he's going to do a mixture of hybrid and kinetic. But these are all possibilities which we cannot dismiss, although I suspect we're not preparing for them. But through all this, Ukraine carries on.
It seems to me, though, so you're seeing this as a kind of a domino, and the question is, what's going to be the first one? What's going to start the chain reaction?
Yeah. very much like the First World War, a series of, in this case, it's not alliances, but in this case, it's a series of interests. It's going to trigger a kind of a gobbling up of assets and resources. But in Trump, he's not particularly strategic. I mean, there are some who are more strategic around him, certainly. But it's a way of controlling the internal narrative. At the same time, all of this, it strikes me that Ukraine is like that rock sticking out of the water that refuses to be submerged by the rising tide of chaos and authoritarianism. So in a kind of ironic way, Ukraine gives me some hope that certainly Russia will not prevail, will not defeat it. But it's precarious, it is
What I
precarious.
think is precarious, to continue with your point, is that Ukraine, in my opinion, right now is facing challenge on three fronts. Because the first one is military. Second one is diplomacy, because all of these peace talks to me is just more pressure from the States to be like, are you ready to surrender yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet?
It's the title of my episode today. It's more surrender. That's what it is. It's
Right,
like,
but
well,
there's a
yeah,
third part of pressure on Ukraine, and that's media, because there's Newsmax that's opening in Ukraine, and that's in a news. I use that word loosely. Organization in United States that's considered to be to the right of Fox News. So, whoa. And
this is stunning. What's going on there? Because this is the last operation I would have expected to open a bureau. And let's face it, there's only one, I think, which is NPR, which actually has a full, bureau team in place and is operating like a traditional bureau would in this wartime. No other major news organization actually has a fully staffed bureau anymore, or is filing the appropriate number of stories for what is, still the number one, I would say, geopolitical story.
I'm afraid the
Why on earth
situation
would
is.
they do it?
I'm afraid the situation is, as Lev Parnas says, is not what it looks like, but it's much worse. Because it appears that Newsmax is planning on broadcasting in Ukraine, in Ukrainian, Russian, and then also in English. And I'm sure they'll be filing stories for back home, because that would be ridiculous not to. But I am more fascinated by the concept that we now have this media pressure on Ukrainians to surrender that's going to be coming to them courtesy of Newsmax. Because Newsmax, it's not reality for real people. It's our story is right, everybody else is fake, and we're not telling you what's going on. We're telling you what to feel.
Yes.
And they're going to be pushing the idea of the war is horrible, the things are terrible, so you should surrender.
Yeah.
And I wonder how Ukrainians are going to respond to this, because there's the government possibility of response, there's the public possibility of response. People might not buy that kind of crap. I'm kind of thinking about how Taco Bell opened in Mexico and failed.
Yeah.
Because
Yes, of course.
so I don't know if this will work or if this will fail right away, because people will just know for what it is. But that's
I suspect they will. Ukrainians are tuning out of their own state media, which was the marathon. Not because it's sort of, necessarily, spinning stuff that's untrue, although its digital arm is pandering to the algorithm, from what I can tell, which is not great. It's losing authority, it's losing respect, but more than that, it's bland. It's bland and dull, and it's losing audienceship. So that either tells you there's a vacuum which AON could fill, or it tells you that Ukrainians are not willing to listen to be, propagandized to, and that if anything smacks of inauthenticity, they'll tune out. I mean, either of these could be true.
But also, will this is a kind of a media question, because if people are not interested in surrendering, can media campaign demoralize them enough where they would consider that this is maybe a possibility, if reality in front of their eyes, if their own personal experience with Russia and the war tells them not to. But it's important, again, kind of thinking back to my conversations with Lev Parnas, who I might be giving testimony in Congress this week as well. He was recalling that when he was involved with launching both Charlie Kirk and Benny Johnson's, like he was around, and he mentioned the number, something like 40 million spent on launching Benny Johnson and 100 million spent on launching Charlie Kirk. They have money. So if they need to spend money on Newsmax to get the propaganda word out, I think that's definitely not a problem. And I'm hearing of some Ukrainian journalists who are being involved, who are being hired to run this project, to be involved with it. And I'm curious how this is going to affect their reputation, because I've dealt with some Ukrainian journalists who had to overcome the fact that at some point they worked for Medvedchuk or something associated with Medvedchuk, who is Putin's was like father-in-law or something like that. And so he owned some media. He was planning to be a ruler of Ukraine, didn't pan out. But there were people who were like, that's a good salary, I'm going to go work for them. And
do you know what? Ukrainians are so much more tuned in to who is who and who they've worked for. They never forget and they never forgive. And if people go over,
because Russians don't care at all. But you're right, Ukrainians do have a much more reputation of professional institute of professional reputation.
They're constantly examining each other and everything that everyone's doing and who they're associated with and where they get the money from. And if they have associated, I mean, a good case here is Alexei Koncharenko, the MP in Odessa. He has a very prominent voice in the parliament. He speaks fantastic English. He's a great communicator. You'd find it very difficult to find issue with anything he broadcasts, either in Russian or Ukrainian. It's pretty solid, anti-Russian stuff. And he does a pretty good job of reporting on what's happening. Plus his role at the OSCE means he has a huge profile in the European Union. There's not a single Ukrainian who'll go like, yeah, I'll vote for him. not a single one, I bet. Not a single one.
It's so strange. I agree.
They're like, well, his father was in the Party of Regions. He was in the Party of Regions, and okay, 8 years ago he flipped, but he once a Yanukovych guy, always a Yanukovych guy. He's had his fingers in the trough. That you never recover that trust in Ukraine. You never recover it.
That's really interesting because we have such different, every country is different. It's the same way that the Epstein scandal is testing every country and every personality for its lack of ethics and morals and standards. This is also something similar where in the United States, I wonder if somebody who worked for Fox and would they, of course, so we see a few situations, but the betrayal, I think, is not forgotten.
And it's not that you we're going to come to a minute with Vitali Portnikov. Everybody knows that he did time in Moscow. I'm not in prison, that he actually worked extensively in Moscow and worked for media organizations there. Everyone knows that, which means people are a little bit on their guard. They are a little bit on their guard. They know he broadcasts in Ukrainian and Russian. They know that. It puts them a little bit on their guard. So they're examining his statements. But actually the universal respect that Vitali is held in by almost everyone I spoke to. I mean, no one really had a bad word to say. The worst thing to say is, I don't regularly listen in. But most actually said that they do, and that they find his views challenging and interesting and provoking. So it's not a blanket like, you speak Russian or you've been in Russia and you're dead to me. It's much more nuanced than that. It's, have you collaborated with people who are Moscow agents? But I'm saying, if you have, or if you've collaborated with someone who's pushing Russian narratives, that's the judgment there. So I think it is quite a nuanced point of view. But it's very widespread, almost, unlike, well, I don't know, I gotta make exact comparisons. I'm just saying it's a very politically literate society.
They're looking at people such as you, such as me, and I think on some level examine us to see if we're like fellow travelers, yes, or if we're there for the cause.
100%. That you can see the calculation going on people's eyes. There was this. I was in a shuttle bus, I remember going, and there were some young guys in there who were there was a girl and a guy who were young teenagers, probably the kids of some minigarch or something, and they were really objectionable and annoying. And the driver, who's from Donetsk or somewhere, was just half an hour into this journey, he's shouting at them, telling them, like, put your effing seatbelts on and stop getting crisps on my seat. He just, he wasn't going to put up with that, whether they were rich kids or whatever. But anyway, I had a nice chat with him, and he gets on the phone. He's talking to somebody else. He's talking to his friend, and he's like, and they obviously have these conversations. Who have you got in the cab today? Right? Just give me a breakdown of their personalities and whatever, and tell me their stories. He says, oh yeah, we've got we've got these annoying teenagers, right? And so I shouted at them, and they said, and we've got a foreigner. And then the other person on the line talked to us. So he goes, no. He said, no. He said, so you can just imagine what the other guy is saying. Oh, a foreigner, right? Is he? Is he for himself? Does he know what's going on? And he said, Нет, он с nami. I thought, oh, and
He's
for those who
with
don't
us.
get that, he's with us.
Right. Yeah,
that was good.
The war does that.
Yeah. There's a lot of grifters. There's a lot of grifters, it has to be said. And some of them are doing excellent work. But people are very fine-tuned to when someone's priority is, I would say, something more noble, or whether their main priority is to themselves, and this is just a conduit to achieve it.
A crisis adds certain degree of you can't afford to mess up. Like things become more, you can't afford to get fooled by propaganda to the same extent. I feel like,
Yes,
there's just stakes are higher.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I remember.
I remember mean there aren't variations.
I'm thinking of a friend of mine, acquaintance, a Trump supporter who Trump 100%, but you know what? He went and got vaccinated because he's not an idiot. And it's this kind of like, I'll believe it to a point, but there is a point.
Yeah, I mean, you want to go and gargle bleach, or something like that.
Right.
Everyone has their limit, I guess in Trump. Well, not everyone has their limit, but hopefully most people do. Doesn't mean everyone has the same point of view. You've got an incredible diversity of points of view. There's no question about that. And you'll have people who disagree vehemently on almost everything. But the one that we don't want to excuse me.
Press like and subscribe.
The one we don't want to creep in is this nihilism, the cynicism about democracy being real. And that's a key Russian narrative everywhere.
It is a key Russian narrative because cynicism is one way to deal with the fact that you have no agency and you have no way to deal with the problems that are being thrown at you, and you have no control, and so you just become cynical. And when you are cynical about yourself, then you become cynical about everybody else, and you become cynical about the world, and that justifies your cynical actions. That doesn't mean you're going to win. It just creates a point of view.
Yeah. And it means you don't take any action to improve things. It means you're not looking forward with hope. I think that's still the defining feature, I think, of Ukrainians, is the idea that there's hope, and hope is the only thing sometimes that can get you through, the dark nights and the cold days and whatever.
But I think it's connected with the fact that they just don't want to be part of Russia. That's just not a functioning model for them, and it's bad, hope, good, opportunity, whatever you want to call that. But European future, they just don't want to be part of Russia, especially that now it's pretty clear that this means there's going to be some form of genocide. Because what does Russia do? They move people around, they resettle people all the time. That's just historically that's their national strategy. Now we call it genocide and resettlement, but that's how they do it. Ukrainians don't want any of it. And so I think that it's almost like they're not supporting democracy for democracy's sake. I think they're doing it because that's their survival mode. But it turns out that democracy is a way to resist.
That's it. It's a useful tool to resist that, and people are starting to realize it's a useful tool to create wealth, to create comfort. And this is the other differentiating factor, in that almost universally Ukrainians strive for things to be better, things to be tastier, things to be more comfortable, things to be nicer. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that needs to improve. There's a lot of legacies from the Soviet Union, from the devastation of the 20th century. Not everything is beautiful and comfortable and nice, but you can see wherever they have agency and power, people try to improve the little spaces that they control. I heard one stunning story. It'll come up somewhere at some point, but it was someone talking about a lady in Kherson, an elderly lady living in one of the areas affected by drones. And apparently this lady went out every day to plant a tree under drone fire. Every day went out to plant a tree or a little sapling. And when asked why on earth she'd be doing that rather than just trying to stay in her flat. And anyone who's heard the stories of Kherson know that this is a lethal activity. People are killed every day by the drones firing, as Russian pilots have tested. And she just said, well, it gives me hope that, one day in 30 years, there's going to be a beautiful forest in that place. And I won't be around, but somebody can enjoy that.
That's a beautiful vision.
Mm.
Talk about hope and talk about thinking beyond yourself. I think that's
it
makes
deeply
me think of
affecting
that. And also makes me think of the Ukrainians and their connection with the earth and agriculture in general. The image of the old lady throwing giving sunflower seeds to the soldiers. So when you're dead, something good will grow out of you.
That
kind
of classic line,
right? It's been a fascinating culture for me to get to know because, I was not planning on speaking about Ukraine when I started. Were you planning on going to Ukraine and like in this cold winter? Was this like part of your life plan? I don't, it wasn't.
Not so much, but it turns out to be an important thing to do. Yeah,
for sure. And I just think about it historically because on one hand, my grandparents literally ran away from Ukraine from pogroms in the 1920s, and they ran to Moscow. And now I'm here, from the United States, speaking about, giving some moral support to Ukrainians and giving some informational support and just life as a world is on fire, and it's a weird place. Like for instance, this past weekend I flew out to San Francisco from my frozen Wisconsin to hang out for a few hours with my co-host. Like you're my co-host. I co-host.
Well, and eventually we'll go and share a pint somewhere. But
right, exactly. I think it's important. I think it's a great opportunity to get to know people, to make new friends, frankly. And for the past few years, I've been fortunate to host or co-host a stream like this every couple of weeks with Vitali Portnikov, who is considered probably one of leading, if not the leading, Ukrainian intellectual in a public sphere. And it's very
foremost journalistic talent. I think it's almost universally recognized now as one of Ukraine's foremost journalists. Absolutely.
The journalist, and it's I think that's probably a very accurate description because I talked to him and I asked, we had a chance to hang out for a few hours, and I said, what about other things? You could do other things. He's like, yeah, I could. I'm pretty good at. I said, all right, I'm going to be ignorant. Have you written books? He's like, oh yeah, I've written these like bestsellers, and because I have this, I have a vision of a novelist, but that's not what interesting to me. I was like, what about teaching? He's like, yeah, but I'm more of a preacher than a teacher.
Yeah.
And it was, the guy just has a very unique position in a society, and to the point that if he would become a Secretary of State, it would be almost like a step down for him. Because it would be like working for somebody, working part of an organization. Now he can be this journalist who gathers former secretaries of state around the table and he asks them questions instead of being one of them. So it's
and they're temporary, whereas he's been around for quite a while. So again, he's in a stronger position.
Yeah, and I saw him once when I went to Ukraine a couple of years ago. and I knew that he was going to be kind of flying through United States, spending a few days here, and I was like, well, great, can I go hang out? And so what he did is he had a few meetings while he was out traveling, and he met with some members of Ukrainian diaspora. He had some academic meetings, and he had one that was for English speakers primarily, that was organized like in the city of San Francisco. And really interesting conversation, really interesting to hear questions. For me in particular, because I do so much of my work this way, and so I don't see an audience, I don't see real life people, how they respond to things, what do they care about. But it was very interesting to see Vitali. So if you don't mind, I will display. We have about 3.5 minute video from that gathering. So we had an interpreter, and I will say that Vitali chose at that meeting to speak exclusively Ukrainian. And he told me that that was his plan. He was going to do that because I offered my service as an interpreter if he was planning on speaking Russian. But I'm not a Ukrainian interpreter. And he said, no, I will definitely be speaking Ukrainian. Okay, so this is Ukrainian and English.
Цивілізація.
The US.
Let's see.
Нова цивілізація.
The US is a new civilization.
Запрограмована на успіх тут.
Is sort of based on the idea of having success here.
Не дуже розуміє світ, який оточує Америку.
Doesn't really understand the world beyond that's not right around the US.
А намагається його проаналізувати в зрозумілих цій цивілізації категоріях.
And tries to understand it in those civilizational categories that it understands.
А вони часто не працюють.
But those categories often don't work.
Коли в Сполучених Штатах бачать, що рішення неправильне, вони намагаються виправити це силою і грошима.
When the US sees that some decision was not correct, they try to fix it with might and with money.
Але коли мова йде про конфлікти в Європі чи в Азії, про національні почуття, про імперські амбіції, це не працює.
But when we're talking about Europe and Asia, when we're talking about imperial ambitions, this doesn't work.
Ви не можете купити Путіна, навіть якщо ви Трамп.
You can't buy Putin even if you're Trump.
Тому що Путін хоче імперію.
Because Putin wants an empire.
Ви не можете купити українців, навіть якщо ви Трамп, тому що українці хочуть зберегти свою державу.
You can't buy Ukrainians even if you're Trump because Ukrainians want to maintain their country.
Ну, простою мовою людина, яка літала на острів Епштейна. Трамп не літав.
To put it simply, think about a person who went to Epstein's Island. Trump went.
Ви не можете купити кожну жінку і кожного чоловіка, яких ви бачите перед собою.
You can't buy every woman and every man that you see before you.
Якихось можете, якихось не можете.
Some you can buy and some you cannot buy.
Ви маєте в це повірити.
You have to believe this.
Ну і тоді потрібно шукати якісь нові технології.
Well,
Розуміння ситуації.
and then you have to look for some kind of new technologies to understand the situation.
І це стосується стосунків Америки з, скажімо так, старим світом.
And this has to do with the relations of the US with the so-called old world.
Якщо ви вирішили жити в Сполучених Штатах, чи ваші батьки,
If you or your parents decided to live in the US,
ви відмовляєтеся від того, я би сказав, навантаження, яке було в Європі чи в Азії.
you're sort of rejecting that kind of pressure that existed for you in Europe or Asia.
Це нормально.
And that's normal. The
Але це не
baggage.
означає, що це навантаження там зникає від того, що ви тут від нього відмовились.
But that doesn't mean that that baggage ceases to exist over there just because you moved away from it to live in the US.
Якщо ви полетите на Луну на місяць з Ілоном Маском,
If you went with Elon Musk to the moon,
там не буде гравітації.
there won't be gravity there.
Ну, ви будете там з ним літати.
Well, you'll be flying with him.
Головне, не говоріть з ним. Не говоріть з ним, not speak.
But it's important not to speak with him.
Просто літайте з ним.
Just fly with him.
Але гравітація все одно буде на Землі.
But there will still be gravity on Earth.
І ви там на місяці намагаєтеся вирішити проблеми Землі, думаючи, що там всі літають. Вони не літають.
And you'll try on the moon to solve the problems on
Well,
Earth,
they
thinking that
hold it.
everyone is flying, but they're not flying there. They're walking still on Earth.
Навіть якщо ви їм дасте багато грошей, вони не полетять.
Even if you give them lots of money, they won't start flying.
Ну це ж просто. Чому американські журналісти про це не говорять?
This is simple. Why are American journalists not talking about it and talking about Ukraine?
Ну вони літають.
Because they're flying.
So a certain dose of
Wow.
realism that I guess we're missing, and we're, you know, for a variety of reasons, we're not seeing what's going on, and we're not equipped
He
to
always is, yeah. He always is, though. He always challenges and gets to you know, this received thinking, which actually is just that. You know, it's not reality. It's just assumptions that people make and confused for reality. He's very good at picking that out. I was focusing on the chat as well. We had someone who was getting increasingly irate for some unknown reason at Vitali speaking in Ukrainian, which is kind of odd, given that he is Ukrainian.
see that it was right there. It verifies it was the right thing for him to do.
Yeah,
I mean, look at people's response. If you can't take, I have this, you know, for just my experience where I'm interviewed, and half the time the interviewer will speak Ukrainian to me, and I respond in Russian because that's what I can do, and I know they'll understand me. Unless I, you know, if I speak English, it won't. And people will start writing in comments, "Why can't you speak to him in Russian? You know," and I'm just, I have to sometimes write, and I mention it like it's okay. I am not offended one bit. When you think about Russia that attacked Ukraine, the fact that they're willing to listen to anybody in Russian, thank you very much, Slava Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's not something they're compelled to do, and it shows an extraordinary generosity in doing so. And sometimes it's just how you, it's the best way to make the conversation happen. I think yeah, a couple of commentators do exactly the same. I've seen Gudkov, Mark Fagan, all do the same. You know, the United 24, whoever they're being interviewed by, will ask the question in Ukrainian, they respond in Russian, and say everyone's happy, but everyone understands what's going on.
So you have to wonder to what extent, you know, those kinds of trolling things that people will say in a comment chat, but will never mention it in a live conversation. To what extent that kind of reputational kind of stuff. And it's interesting because part of the Institute of Reputation and how it's viewed in Russia has been a big problem that they don't have elections, because we have politicians who have, I mean, things have been said about them, but once they win elections, it buys them certain kind of immunity from some of the old things, because they've been elected. And so old accusations, not crimes, but accusations of misspoke or insulted somebody, would go, well, you know what, this person is elected, this person is not elected, we can tell who's the winner, who people support, and go from there. And when you don't have a country with that kind of a feedback loop at all, then those kinds of accusations, they never go away. They just get added to the list, and you're always just building your obituary, where they'll go, and in 2011 he said this to so and so, and we'll never forgive him for it. And that's not a way to move forward. That's where, interestingly, both Russians and Ukrainians are struggling with Trump, because he refuses to see origins of anything. For him, it's just, we're here now, let's make a deal, move forward, make money. And both Russians and Ukrainians are like, but there was a problem. There is a problem. There's a root cause of this. And
maybe we're not that interested in money. Maybe that's not the motivating force, either on either side, actually.
But if I can buy everybody on Epstein's Island, what do you mean I can't buy everybody in Ukraine?
This is it. This is it. Oh, goodness. And it feeds into this idea of negotiations, you know, whether the entire process is fake, whether there are people on the US side who think this is genuine. I don't know. I can't tell, and it's difficult for me to judge whether there's anything genuine at all. I certainly know on the Russian side, there seems not to be any desire for peace or any need for peace at this point. And indeed, the risk to Putin's regime is considerably higher if there were to be peace than if he just carries on doing what he's doing.
Agreed.
But the mainstream media seem to be sucked into, or the legacy media seem to be sucked into, this whole performative negotiation process. They're like, well, you know, maybe nothing will come of it, but let's follow it as if it's real. And I think that's part of the whole performative part. Then as it drags,
it's one way to keep Ukraine in the news headlines, And on that level, I accept it. The same way that I have no problem with Ukrainians engaged in this total fake peace process as a way of dealing with the fact that there's a crazy ass United States president that they have to deal with. I'm like, well, sorry, that's the dance you have to dance. I get it.
I don't think it benefits Ukraine, though, on any level, because while people are buying into the idea of a fake process, they're not arming Ukraine. They're not accepting the reality that there is no peace.
And
so
that's
actually,
why this is a good thing for Putin. I understand, but Ukraine
it's a good thing for Putin because it works. Yeah, exactly.
What can Ukraine do? It can't say, you know what, Donald, F you. We're just going to do things our own way. You are weirdo. Goodbye. And you smell. They can't do that. So they have to be like, all right, peace process. Yay.
Yay. Just please don't sell weapons directly to Russia or start buying their oil. Because I think that's the real risk here is like, if you say to the orange demigod what you really think of him, then he does have some leverage in this, which is fully to flip and side with the aggressor.
Do you think he's getting closer to that, or how does it look like from Europe? Because I feel like I live in this expectation for so long that I'm just like, and how does that look like from there?
I'm not sure I represent, mainstream Europe either. I'm on the sort of super cynical, Ukrainian wavelength here. I just know that Putin's only trick is a one-trick pony, and that is escalation. There's obviously other layers to that, but escalation is the only strategic tool in his armory because he's not a smart guy and he's not a strategic guy. But it also fits in traditional Russian statecraft. You keep escalating, you keep probing, and as long as you can feel mush, you keep pushing on through. And that's what he does. The trouble is what he's getting here from the US is mush. What he's getting from Europe is sort of semi-mush. And that means he's going to keep on probing and pushing.
But that's exactly the same thing we're seeing from Trump, that plays by the same rule book, and it's always escalation. Because as I look at it from the authoritarian state's point of view, the screws are never untightened. They're just tightened. They don't work the other way because then they blow off if you start to untighten them. Because then you have perestroika, Gorbachev, and like, where's that country? So I think that they know, and Trump knows, you just attack. You only go forward, and that's what Putin is doing. Same rule book, different opportunities.
Yeah, and I think Trump could do that to Ukraine. I mean, the thumbnail on this is, here we go again, surrender, forcing Ukraine to capitulate. And this narrative, because there's two doing the rounds at the moment. One is the so-called fake negotiations. The other one is Ukraine has to hold elections. These are 2 points where you really can lean on Ukraine. You can pressure it, you can force it, you can even try to force some level of great dysfunction onto it with a view to making it capitulate to Russia. So I think these are 2 real danger points now. But Ukraine has resisted, going down that route. But again, I find some portions of the legacy media entirely disingenuous. If you look at Zelensky's actual comments, is we will hold elections when a ceasefire holds, when there are certain security guarantees in place. It's a clever stance because he knows that circumstance will not arise.
He can just say after Putin's death.
Yeah, after Putin's death. He could say that. That doesn't go down quite so well with the Orange God King. But he's saying essentially the same thing by saying, when there's a security situation that allows it, we will. Well, Putin's demise is the only security situation which would potentially would allow that. But the way it's spun in the Financial Times that apparently broke the story is that elections are coming to Ukraine, as early as 24th of February to time with that's a line written in the Kremlin. What on earth is a apparently reputable paper pushing this garbage for?
2 things.
Kremlin-lined garbage.
First of all, Trump now regularly says stuff that doesn't and that is not supported by other people. He did this with Mexico. He did this with Zelensky all the time. And he's done this with other country. I'm trying to think of who, but he regularly says, like, I talked to them. They said, sure. And then those other people said, we didn't talk to them. We didn't discuss this. This didn't happen. So that's part of Trump mindset, Trump bubble, Trump dementia issues. But the other part is there's a great comment here is clarifying that I thought that Trump was taco, which is not always escalation. And I think it's important to clarify that when he sees that this could cost him money, he's not a fool that way. That's where his crazy goes away. And he goes, oh, just kidding. And that's where he is taco. But when it comes to other situations that don't involve that much money or cryptocurrency or whatever, then
or
it's
risk, when he's good, can guarantee a result. It's exactly what Putin does. Or until the full-scale invasion, he would typically only make a move when he could guarantee the outcome.
Because you can say that Putin is taco with his hybrid war, because it's not quite anything for sure, but it's definitely a threat. And it's
very tellingly, he mocked David Cameron, who called the Brexit referendum, saying, well, why would you call a vote unless you could guarantee the outcome of it? I think they're genuinely perplexed as to why a political leader would create a scenario of risk that they can't control.
It makes me think of like in a courtroom as a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a court interpreter. They shouldn't ask a question at a trial that they don't know an answer to in advance. But I didn't know that you can approach the same way, to an election. So that's kind of it's a twist.
This is where the midterms become interesting, because Trump may suspect that the outcome is not something he can control and is not necessarily in his favor. So he has to engineer the circumstances to get the outcome he needs. Well, that's a totally different topic. But no, Putin and Trump, I think, operate on the same level, which is thinking in terms very much of expending resources and risk and moving forward when they believe they can control the outcomes of those, tackling when they lose control of some of those outcomes.
Yeah, the Sherry writes, some Ukrainians are denouncing Zelensky because they think the fake peace process is giving Ukrainians false hope for an end to the war. Which is why I'm clarifying that it's a thing that serves its own purpose. And as long as we all understand it, that's great. I would like it, I guess maybe in closing, Jonathan, I'd like to hear, because here in America, we've heard so many times about, things from Zelensky about Biden, that made Biden cringe, but he couldn't stop helping because Ukraine was more important than whatever Zelensky said. And so he continued to support Ukraine as much as he could, not enough. And now we see Europe that is like in the same boat, it seems like, where they feel like things that Zelensky is saying are not making them happy, but they have to continue helping because Ukraine is more important than what Zelensky said. Was what he's saying actually helping? Is it actually, like, I don't know, shaming people? Is this a good? How does this play in Europe?
See, I don't think anyone in Ukraine believes there's a peace process, because they see the evidence of that every night with shaheeds flying over their buildings. So I think they look at this and, they're probably thinking, well, Zelensky has to do what he has to do, and no one thinks that any good will come of it. But I think many are like, well, this is what he has to do to keep the Orange God from getting angry. Europe equally could get angry, but they're not willing to stand up to him. So they're in no position to judge Zelensky at all. They're in no position. They know they're in no position. And they know if they were to critique Ukraine on this matter, they'd have to take some precipitous action. And of course, the lead amongst all this, who I think is genuinely doing a disservice to everybody he's supposed to be representing, is Mark Rutte. Now, I've had endless arguments with Miss Jonna Pierce about this, who says this is his job. He has to defend NATO, and he has to, his role is there to smooth things over. That's the very job. But I think the mark of a leader is to accept when you've been asked to do a job that's impossible, and in that situation decline. You go back to the Second World War one. If Chamberlain was being strategic in trying to buy time, you could say, okay, maybe that would be valid to appease Hitler until you're ready to make war. And there's some evidence that he he was mobilizing behind the scenes, but there's also evidence that he genuinely believed he'd achieved some kind of peace. I don't think Zelensky believes any of that. I think he has a fairly clear-eyed view of what Putin is. I don't think that Rutte has a clear-eyed view of the threat from Russia or the threat from Trump, unfortunately. And in that position, a leader would say, look, I'm in an impossible position. What I'm doing now is preventing Europe from rearming, preventing us from supporting Ukraine as it should, preventing us from speaking a little bit of truth to power when it comes to Washington, and that actually I'm doing more harm than good. But it seems that Russia does not have any such capability. He's cut him through, and it's manager all the way, and there's no leadership there.
No, and some leadership is needed. It's I guess we're watching to see what's going to happen with our presidential elections, which we'll discuss in the future. But leaders are all over. I think Vitali Portnikov is an interesting kind of a leader who is not necessarily interested in leading anybody, but he is just conveying his message and trying to, I think, guide the conversation. But that's another way of kind of moral, intellectual leadership that I think is also just as needed as politics.
It takes courage, takes a lot of thought and courage and effort as well. So absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered all the immediate bases that we needed to cover. And for anyone who is questioning Vitali Portnikov leaving Ukraine for even a handful of days or whatever it is he's gone, geez, people, I mean, to me, something I have a hard time understanding, because it seems like the best thing for Ukraine is to have people who can help gather more support and tell Ukraine's story to the world. That's the biggest plus right now for Ukraine. This is what Timothy Snyder was talking about how big of a problem it was that we had that we have this conflict where we are so heavily engaged during Biden administration, yet we had practically no contacts, very limited contacts with Ukraine. We need in the United States that communication from Ukraine, because for those that don't know, we're really far away. And so for me, it was easier to fly from Wisconsin to San Francisco than to fly to Kiev. Kudos to you, Jonathan, for doing it. But I think that Ukraine just gains tremendously from having its, celebrities and leaders, intellectual and otherwise, journalists, whatever, being out there speaking about what's going on in Ukraine and reminding everyone, because it's so much more than Zelensky. It's Ukraine.
And not all the stories ought to be about the suffering and the temperatures, and there is some of that stuff, of course there is, but there are many stories of extraordinary, and I don't want to use the word resilience because it sounds like an imposition now, but there are many stories of incredible resistance and innovation. Those aren't being told, and I think those would resonate more, because Russia's number one narrative is that it is inevitable. Its victory is inevitable. It's a bit like the Thanos of nations. It believes that its cruel mission will always triumph in the end. But this is not the case. And there are many narratives coming out of Ukraine that suggest that Russia is not just not inevitable, but actually its defeat is the inevitability here. So yeah, there's an opportunity to flip that story. Unfortunately, many of the media do not seem to like changing the tune or dramatically changing the framework of the story. But this is something I encourage all journalists to look for, the different angle, which is Russia will lose, Russia can lose, Russia has lost in the past. I think I've got that completely the wrong way around. I was trying to paraphrase the old, Lenin kind of line there.
Russia lost, they are losing, they'll keep on losing. Those are some things that will never change. Losers. But I thank all of our wonderful listeners and viewers who are subscribed to Silicon Curtain, who subscribe to a Rashkin Report, especially those special few people that subscribe to a Rashkin Report on Substack. That is the very special people. It's actually free, so just subscribe for free. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. And till we see you again, take care.
Thank you, Yuri.